public is shown hypersonic weapons. Leadership inspects rapid production missile technologies, as documented during Secretary Hegseth's visit to Castellion. This is a deliberate misdirection. The narrative presented is that a faster missile is the decisive factor in modern conflict. This is fundamentally incorrect. The primary vector for systemic collapse is not speed, it is silence. The true theater of operations is not the sky, it is the silent, abyssal plane of the ocean floor. Strategic analysis from RUSI confirms that the global economy's central nervous system, the network of undersea fiber optic cables carrying trillions in daily financial transactions, remains indefensibly vulnerable. These are not military targets, they are solvency vectors. Severing them does not declare war, it triggers a global liquidity crisis. The secondary vector is orbital blinding. While the focus remains on kinetic anti-satellite weapons, CSIS reports highlight the far lower cost and higher deniability of ground-based laser systems designed to permanently disable imaging and communication satellite sensors. The objective is not to create debris, but to induce cataracts on the system. Data superiority, demonstrated as a critical asset in conflicts like Ukraine, is nullified. This protocol creates the blind Leviathan, a hegemon with immense kinetic power but stripped of its sensory apparatus. With its industrial capacity and financial solvency already in decline, the loss of data awareness forces it into a launch-on-warning posture. It can no longer verify, assess, or de-escalate. It can only react. The true accelerant is not a missile. It is the forced response of a superpower that has been rendered deaf and blind, transforming a data flow liability into a kinetic, zero-sum certainty. The trigger for systemic conflict is no longer a rival's strength. It is a nation's own balance sheet. When domestic liabilities exceed a state's capacity to service them, the leadership is mathematically forced into a solvency protocol. The objective is not victory against a peer, but the conversion of an internal liability into an external, kinetic event. Consider Russia. CSIS analysis frames the conflict not as a war of choice, but as a solvency crisis. The primary domestic liability was a population increasingly disconnected from the state apparatus, an unpopular mandate waiting to detonate. The war serves as a high-cost, high-yield instrument to manage this internal decay. This is the pivot to asymmetry. Conventional weakness, eroding industrial capacity, demographic decline, forces the state to leverage an asymmetric tool, war itself. The conflict becomes a mechanism for social consolidation and the liquidation of dissent. The kinetic cost of the campaign, however high, is calculated as preferable to the systemic cost of domestic collapse. It is a launch-on-warning posture against its own people. The unpopular war is therefore a misnomer. It is a non-discretionary expenditure. From a purely systemic perspective, the battlefield is simply a more controllable environment than a nationwide solvency event. The state is not fighting an enemy. It is servicing a debt. This is the blueprint for 21st century escalation. Internal rot externalized as zero-sum conflict. The central equation governing modern conflict is no longer about troop numbers or industrial output. It is about kinetic cost. A strategic analysis from RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute, frames the new battlefield economics with terrifying clarity. A $5 million main battle tank can now be neutralized by a $500 first-person view drone. This is not a marginal improvement in efficiency. It is a 10,000 to 1 cost inversion. The model of projecting power through billion-dollar platforms is financially broken. This economic reality has a name: the democratization of violence. It is the systemic process by which the ability to deliver lethal, kinetic force once the exclusive domain of the nation-state and its industrial base, is made available to small groups or even individuals. The barrier to entry for executing a kinetic, zero-sum outcome has collapsed. You no longer need a shipyard to sink a ship. You need a credit card and a Wi-Fi connection. For a hegemon facing a solvency crisis, this new calculus is a mathematical forcing function. It cannot afford to sustain legacy systems against a 10,000 to 1 cost disadvantage. The protocol, therefore, is to embrace the asymmetry. Leadership is forced to pivot from producing expensive, vulnerable assets to fielding cheap, swarming, and expendable systems. This isn't a choice. It is a balance sheet imperative. The liability of an aging military-industrial complex is being transformed into a vector for a new, cheaper, and more volatile form of conflict. The regional instability you are being shown is not the source of the threat. It is a symptom engineered into a proxy laboratory. These designated gray zones are the staging grounds where new protocols of economic and kinetic warfare are tested before deployment on a systemic level. The objective is not to win these regional conflicts, but to gather performance data. Examine the financial vector. The Nigerian Naira's collapse to N1,490 per dollar is not a localized tragedy. It is a live-fire exercise in currency demolition. It provides a blueprint for managing public reaction and supply chain disruption when liquidity is systematically removed from a target economy. This is a balance sheet operation executed on a national scale. Simultaneously, the kinetic laboratory is active. Ukrainian forces utilizing AI targeting systems against Russia is the field test. As reported by DW, this isn't about one nation's defense. It's about calibrating the efficiency of algorithm-driven warfare. It establishes a baseline for the kinetic cost of liquidating assets and neutralizing opposition without deploying a large-scale conventional force. This staging is a mathematical necessity. When a hegemon's industrial capacity and financial solvency decay, its leadership must adopt asymmetric accelerants. CSIS and RUSI analysts have noted that these proxy zones allow for the testing of high-risk tools, like the hypersonic strike weapons inspected by the Secretary of War at Castellion, without triggering a direct, peer-level response. Therefore, the protocol is clear. Use gray zones to refine the tools needed to manage internal decay. Warnings of instability in regions like South Africa or even Canada are not humanitarian alerts. They are market signals identifying the next laboratories. The systemic risk is not the lab itself, but the fact that the experiment is designed to develop a treatment for the solvency crisis at home. The vector is being aimed inward. The doctrine is designated Launch on Warning. It is a Cold War protocol for a solvency crisis. The premise is simple. If early warning systems detect an inbound nuclear salvo, you launch a retaliatory strike before the incoming warheads detonate. You do not wait to confirm impacts. Waiting guarantees decapitation. Launching offers a mathematical chance of a zero-sum outcome. This protocol assumed the primary threat was a peer adversary's missile. It did not account for a new vector, an attack on the warning system itself. Analysts at CSIS document the systemic vulnerability of command, control, and communications, C3, networks to cyber penetration. In this scenario, the first kinetic act is not a missile launch. It is an invisible string of code. This creates the fog of digital war. A commander sees their screens go black. Is it a system malfunction, or is it the prelude to a decapitation strike by hypersonic weapons? U.S. leadership is already inspecting the next generation of these weapons, designed for rapid production, source number 2. The time to impact for these assets is not 30 minutes, it is under 5. The decision window has collapsed. The math is irrefutable. When the time to verify an attack exceeds the time until your own annihilation, the only logical protocol is to launch. The commander is forced into a binary choice based on incomplete, potentially manipulated data. As battlefield AI is now a proven commodity in theaters like Ukraine, source number 3, an AI-driven cyber attack could trigger this entire cascade without a single human operator. This is the ultimate asymmetric escalation. It is not an attack by a foreign power on a nation's military, but an attack by a nation's own decaying system on its final failsafe. The liability of a declining industrial base is leveraged into a kinetic accelerant, transforming a solvency problem into a global existential risk. The fear is no longer of the enemy's missile, but of your own radar. The protocol is dual-track. As the Philadelphia Fed installs new board members to manage the terminal phase of fiat solvency, source number 1, the defense apparatus inspects Castellion's rapid production missile lines, source number 2. One vector is financial, the other is kinetic. They are not independent strategies. They are components of a single launch-on-warning system triggered by a balance sheet crisis, not an enemy-first strike. The logic is irrefutable. When a hegemon can no longer afford its liabilities, it must engineer an event that allows for their radical repricing. The delivery mechanism is already operational. As confirmed by reports on the use of AI in Ukraine, source number 3, the tools for an attribution impossible strike are no longer theoretical. CSIS analysts note that AI-driven cyber warfare allows a state actor to mimic the signature of a non-state entity, creating a plausible deniability layer. The purpose is not pure conflict. It is to introduce a controlled shock, a kinetic cost imposed on the network to test for systemic fragility. The same fragility seen in the accelerating collapse of peripheral currencies, like the Nigerian Naira, source number 4. The calibration forecast. Within 10 months, a Tier 1 maritime logistics hub or a primary data clearinghouse will experience a 48 to 72-hour blackout. It will be officially designated a cascading system failure, with blame directed at aging infrastructure or a sophisticated but untraceable ransomware group. This will not be an act of war. It is a calibration shot to stress test the system's breaking points and provide the political justification for deploying emergency financial protocols.